The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, and I'm very happy to return with my viewers once again to the study of Lili Boulanger's remarkable collection of orchestral works. So far in my series of orchestration lessons, we've looked at two of Lili's grandest attempts at scoring for orchestra and chorus, Vieille Prière Bouddhique, or the Ancient Buddhist Prayer, which we covered in the first two lessons, and the massive Psalm 130, probably her largest and most sweeping work, which you can view in lessons 3 through 6. Both of these works were conceived during her tenure at the Villa Medici, where she was staying under her obligations as the winner of the 1913 Prix de Rome. Let's jump forward a few years, to a time when the 24-year-old composer had been struggling to compose her opera Princess Mélène, but realized that her terminal condition wouldn't allow her more than a few months more of life. At this point, she finalized all her other remaining scores and embarked on two final shorter compositions, D'un soir triste and D'un matin de printemps, translated as Of a Sad Evening and Of a Spring Morning. These are sister pieces, sharing thematic elements, but having very different emotional directions and orchestral colors. There's a common misconception about these works, that they were first composed in their chamber duo and trio forms, and then orchestrated from these scores. That is actually incorrect. Lili appears to have conceived both works in sketch form, and then adapted the various versions into different idioms, rather than building larger versions from a basic smaller version. So when it's claimed that the orchestral version of D'un matin de printemps was arranged from the trio version, that's not quite right. It might just as well be said that the chamber version is a reduction of the orchestral version that Lili had in her head all along. That's my strong suspicion after studying it. In this lesson and the next, we'll be studying D'un matin de printemps in detail, to see how Lili Boulanger created such a light-handed work of such intense excitement and vibrant colors, showing that she was every bit the master orchestrator as her compatriots Ravel and Debussy. In a sense, providing a link through her oeuvre that informs our vision of the artistic progress of that era to be much fuller and more interconnected. Before we start the score analysis, I have to mention that in this case, there is no orchestral version uploaded to IMSLP. However, the Internote company has a very inexpensive edition in full score, and they very kindly lent me the PDF files to use in this lesson. I've linked their website in the information below, so if you want your own hard copy of these pages, then get in touch with them directly. The instrumentation is triple winds with standard auxiliaries, 4-3-3-1 brass, celesta, harp, and strings, but interestingly, no timpani in the percussion section, just cymbals, tambourine, and triangle. Notice the use of A clarinet, with the key signature of C minor. This is possibly a copyist error, since this piece is essentially in the key of E minor, transposed as G minor for A clarinet. As a result, you'll see very many A naturals marked throughout the score for both clarinets and bass clarinet. It might have been better to score the clarinets in two flats, or simply without a key signature. The tempo marking starts with the direction very lively, light, and cheerful, drawing an immediate contrast between the character of this piece and its sister, D'un soir triste. Cheerful versus sad, morning versus evening, light versus dark. It's as if Lili is distilling two essential moods which drove her creativity, and using them to contrast different sides of her artistic personality. The piece opens with a punta d'arco divisi upper strings in slurred staccatos, playing with the very tip of the bow. The stresses in these repeated chords are underlined by celesta, triangle, first clarinet, and first oboe, in a very light but radiant voicing. The first flute solo enters with the main theme at bar 3, and Lili very wisely omits the stresses at first, considering how weak the register of the statement. But even when these light stresses return to accompany the solo, This is still a standout example of how to accompany a low flute, especially in a lively passage, with textures that are as thin as tissue paper. For the transitional section at Figure 1, Lili doubles first flute with first clarinet, which will work fine here if the clarinetist remembers that they're still playing pianissimo and the flutist continues to operate as a soloist. Notice that the harpist plays a subtle counter-melody restating the opening bars of the flute, the melodic curve of which is outlined from below by solo cello. Then the first violins take over 4 bars later with a secondary theme of sorts, under the overall marking of graceful. Notice the drop in dynamic from the other strings, plus the muted horn pad marked singing and sweet. Lili wants the horns to do more than just play a background pad here, but not to dominate. Flouncy clarinet and then oboe and flute on the next page take this passage to a stronger ending, but even this is lightly stated, not getting much above mezzo forte crescendo, or forte in the strings. The G seconds in the clarinets are doubled by rising, building strings, while bassoons are colored by double basses below. Now Lili reverses the formula, dancing staccato accompaniment in the winds this time, with harp and strings for occasional doubling, thickening, and rhythmic emphasis. Here she shows herself the equal of the other great orchestrators of the time, in getting the listener to think they heard what they didn't. Consider this melodic statement of bassoon and piccolo 2 octaves apart, a beautiful matchup that uses the natural reinforcement of the bassoon's higher partials to the piquant piccolo. But then the piccolo drops out halfway through, and the English horn dovetails into the line an octave lower, using the inherent resonance so well that the unwary listener may not even notice the drop of an octave and the slight change of color. Having pushed the experiment thus far, Lili goes even further in dropping the doubling from above entirely, and instead reinforces the bassoon with violas, letting the sound of the upper wind and string accompaniment fill in the suggestion of higher partials. Then the piccolo comes right back in again in a 2-octave melody with bass clarinet this time, dovetailing over to oboe. These are intriguing combinations and accompaniments, glowingly resonant and yet light as a feather. First bassoon returns, completely solo this time, and then with the first clarinet thickening in response. Throughout all this piece, the strings play various combinations of divisi, which is easy enough to balance at such a light dynamic and such careful scoring. As the first violins take over the melody again, Lili creates a wonderfully luminous backdrop for them, a pad of horns doubling violas, with the flutes catching the overtones above. It's the perfect touch of generosity amidst the bantering energy of the accompaniment. Note the architecture of the next dynamic build, with oboe being pushed from below into the start of each rising motive by the first clarinet, along with flute trills and rising English horn, harp, and first violins. This is a great marking, very decidedly. It allows the music to be committed without being heavy. More energy, more strength, but not really more weight. It's the ideal moment for these tambourine trills. The upper winds rip little groups of B Phrygian pentuplets alternating with A Dorian. More of Lili's trademark modality, with swirling trills of octave fifths and seconds, violas, and trumpets. This is the perfect framework for a boisterous statement by the horns, giving part of the second theme its own identity, which as we'll see will lead in a new direction soon. After 2 bars, Lili swaps the formula again, with swirling winds and ripping strings, while the boisterous motive is given to English horn and bassoons à two. I love the structure of the wind down, with that 4th horn concert B standing out so clearly as the rest of the brass climb down with triplets and winds and strings exchange rips. The music effortlessly cools down to this moment of meditation and supreme craft. Just to quickly dispense with the framing here, the double basses are playing a natural harmonic on the major third note of the G string, sounding B above middle C. The violins are trading off on trills on B below middle C, first as a minor second and then as a major second. Harp outlines the diminished fifths. Now let's look at the brilliant woodwind scoring. Clarinet and bass clarinet in octaves, walking down from the held B octaves by English horn and second bassoon. Lili is adding gravity at last here, and it's dark and rich, yet not syrupy or congested. Notice how roles trade off to first bassoon and first oboe, then back and forth as the entire thing jumps up a whole step, even adding a flute as color on the top line. The whole passage is scored so delicately that all it takes is a single line of violas and then second violins to color the horns and oboe toward a string-like sound. When the strings finally do take over, the transformation feels effortless and inevitable. The superbly elegant heart of the piece lies ahead, which we'll cover in part 8 of these orchestration lessons on Lili Boulanger. I hope to see you there.